This quote that's usually attributed to the writer Mark Twain. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. But did you know there's reason to doubt that Mark Twain ever said this at all, thus ironically proving the point. And today, whoever said this quote is truer than ever before. However, the actual term false news is believed to have spread throughout history, which constituted the genesis of media lies, and online in particular, where anyone can post anything with virtually no consequences. It's no wonder that the media we consume is infested with lies.
I'm not going to give you. Can you stay counter? You are fake news, sir. Go ahead.
People look like they have a much better life than they really do.
The term fake news was first used in 1890s when sensational reports in newspapers were common. MIT study found that fake news spreads faster than true news, which seems the quote has some truth. Online fake news is believed to have originated globally in 2016 from a small town in Macedonia, where teenagers were creating websites that claimed to be news sources, but were actually just filled with fabricated and sensational stories. Ever think why? Ad revenue. The more clicks, the more money they made. It's a lot easier to get clicks when you can just make up whatever tantalizing story you want. The thing is, while they were just teenagers looking to make a quick buck, media conglomerates were coming to a similar realization. As print news died out and they lost their loyal subscribers, they faced a new sea of competition online. And so, the clickbait arms race began. After all, the business model of news and media is selling your attention to advertisers. You are the product, and they have to make you to keep watching, reading, and clicking, keep you consumed. Their primary goal is not to deliver the most accurate news, it's to attract more attention and more money. And it's been proven that polarizing stories perform best. So no wonder we are more divided than ever when it's in the media's best interest to manufacture fear and outrage. And that's just when the goal is to make money. So what about when powerful groups plant fake news stories to deliberately pit us against each other and create a certain narrative? Or countries who plant fake stories to influence elections or even wars? Now, who wouldn't remember the barrage of fake news around the world about weapons of mass destruction that Iraq possessed? And all that fake news was spread to create fear and panic amongst people to legitimize the war. This fake narrative building was used as an advantage by the aggressors. It's no wonder fake news is so prevalent when there is so much money and power to be gained from manipulating us like this. And even when these false stories get debunked, the damage is already done, because enough people will have already read and believed the lies. And the truth just isn't as exciting, so it doesn't spread as widely, and neither does it get media limelight. Just keep the Iraq example in mind. When Tony Blair accepted that it was a miscalculation on the part of UK to enter the war, and he apologized to his people and to the people of Iraq. Now, how many of you would remember that statement from Tony Blair? Of course, fake news is a whole spectrum. Yes, there are stories that are totally made up and just blatant lies and propaganda. But if we're talking about mainstream news, there's actually something more subtle going on at the other end of the spectrum that's perhaps even more worrying. Half-truths are statements that are partially true, but not fully true, or not the whole story. In the media, half-truths allow you to make something seem believable and avoid libel, but remove all the context and nuance so you can distort reality to suit the narrative you want. And so this is why two news stations can talk about the same issue but have such glaringly different arguments. You're always just seeing a carefully constructed snapshot of what someone wants you to see, never the full picture with the details. And at least the media houses like ARY News and the Geo News in Pakistan, or Fox News and CNN in the US, you know they have their clear biases towards certain political parties and ideologies. The real problem is half-truths are inescapable everywhere. There is infinite information out there, that can fit almost any narrative. So when it's a human decision of which stories to report and which stats and details to include, there will always be bias. Even pictures and videos can be so easily edited or taken out of context to apply something totally different that fits the narrative someone wants. And we're not just talking about news here, putting whatever spin on information they want that fits their agenda. After all, controlling our media is the closest thing there is to controlling how we think and eventually our minds. How we vote, how we act, and how we feel. A lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. But it gets worse. If we're not honest, we all know that there's malicious forces out there planting fake news stories. And we also know that the media only gives us half-truths that suits their agenda. But we still like to pretend that we don't fall for all that. We get our information from unbiased sources. But we don't, because unbiased does not exist. Even if it's the most honest journalist trying to be fair and impartial, they've been indoctrinated just like the rest of us and have their own subconscious biases, even if it's not intentional. Their choice of words and what to include is unavoidably going to have their bias. Their worldview will always influence what they show you and how they say it. It's the same with sites that claim to deliver impartial, balanced news. It's still down to a small group of people who have their own biases, who decide what to show and subconsciously will want to focus on the issues important to them. They'll subconsciously want to discredit the views and ideas they don't agree with and pick stories that show them in a less favorable light. We're not just battling fake news, we're battling human psychology. It's like a game of Chinese whispers. By the time you hear any information, it's been passed through multiple other biased sources who've distorted it, whether intentionally or not. And so, you start to realize, to a certain extent, all news is fake news, because 100% true and objective news is impossible. Whether it's fake news, half-truths, or just simply a subconscious bias, in one way or another, you're being lied to. And when you think about it, this isn't surprising. What is surprising is we really don't seem to care. In other words, we want our worldview to make sense. And so we instinctively seek out and believe the information that aligns with our views and disregard the rest. And this is just one of many cognitive biases we all have that make us care less about the accuracy of the information and care more about as us being right. It's why two people will hear the same information and both will interpret it to fit their current beliefs. Example is, if you hear something bad about someone you don't like, you believe it immediately. Whereas if it's something bad about someone you really like and care about, you are much more skeptical of it. Biases like these are also why nobody ever really changes their opinion in a debate or argument. They just become even more entrenched in their original views. Our minds simplify things to try and make sense of the world. And just like with the media, accuracy is not the priority. Even our own memories can't be trusted. Our minds want to fill in the gaps, which leads us to inventing or removing details without being aware of it. Which is why two people can remember the same story differently. We think of our brain like a database, but it's not. It looks for patterns and generalizations, and rather than remembering exact details, it remembers fragments of memories. So when you recall a memory, your brain is just trying to piece some of those fragments back together and can easily be distorted in ways we don't realize. Just look at the Mandela effect, where huge groups of people remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 80s, even though he didn't die until 2013. Our memories fail us constantly. And as if that wasn't bad enough, then something came along that made the truth even harder to decipher. This moment right now, this feels real. But is it real? Or is it just fake? Just like the media conglomerates, social media platforms profit from sucking you in. Just like with the media, these social platforms know that polarizing and controversial content performs best. And we already know about how they exploit human vulnerabilities, as they call it, because they've publicly talked about how they created the endless scroll effect, the dopamine hits, and an algorithm designed to continuously keep you on the platform. The stuff that triggers an emotional reaction in people. Reliability is not a factor, but it's the algorithm they care about. And this helps fuel the huge divide between us all. Everyone's feed is different and tailored to them and their beliefs. You essentially get put into an echo chamber that shows you the articles that align with your views and articles that dismiss the alternatives. And because these social platforms are tracking everything you click, read, and see, the algorithm very quickly learns exactly how to keep you there longer, which in turn makes you become more entrenched in your beliefs. It's difficult to have empathy when you literally can't see where the other side are coming from. We all think we're smarter than average, so most people are wrong. The reality is that it's easier to believe that we're on the smart side and the others who disagree must be idiots, when often we're just consuming different media and none of us are seeing the full picture. In fact, some scholars have argued that because there's so many media sources to choose from, we now have selective exposure and can just follow the sources that align with the views we want to hear, which may be why the divide between the right and the left grows wider, and there's a reported increase in extremist views. We are living in an age where people just read the exaggerated headlines anyways. And whilst it's easy to blame the media, blame the platforms, at some point in time we have to blame ourselves too. The reason fake news spreads so fast on social media is because we share it without questioning how valid or true it really is. If it aligns with our views, we rarely question the bias or lack of context it may have. After all, the world is incredibly complicated, and almost every issue is intricate, so we simplify things to such basic two-dimensional version. We pretend things are more black and white than they really are. We look to tear down or ignore people with opposing views, not to try to understand where they're coming from. We fill our social media with filtered photos and fake friends, until the sites that promise to connect us to the world have left us more disconnected than ever. It's hardly surprising certain influencers exploit this concept for profit by showing you a glimpse of their seemingly perfect life so that you buy the products they allegedly recommend. It's only when you start to look deeper does the illusions start to crumble. Deepfake technology has hit the human race like a storm, and just imagine how accurate this technology will be in few years. I'm sure you know that was not Obama saying that. In fact, a deepfake video that was artificially created several years ago. We are fast approaching a time when videos can be created depicting anyone saying or doing anything without their consent, and it'll be entirely indistinguishable from the real thing. With the rise of artificial intelligence along with deepfake technology, it won't be long until recordings won't be considered evidence in a court of law. So again, you start to question, what can we trust? How about documentaries? The very definition of a documentary is to provide factual report on a particular subject. But if you look at some of the most popular documentaries in recent times, you'll see they are filled with same half-truths as everything else. They need views to be successful, and what better way to get views than make them as sensationalized as possible. Yes, they may have a lot of truth in them, but they're still never giving you a full balanced perspective. Entertainment is the priority, not accuracy. Okay, so how about statistics? We think of them as being factual, but of course they're so often twisted and widely extrapolated to suit a specific agenda. How often does someone quote the result of the study, but have never looked into what the sample size was, or who paid for it, and whether they have vested interest in the results? It's for this reason, every other week, we hear this thing is bad for you, and then the next week, it's supposedly good for you. For example, if you remember, there was a study that said that eating eggs was bad for people as the yolk of the egg contained large amounts of cholesterol, which is bad for the heart. But then later on, according to Harvard Health Publishing, it was found that eggs are good for the health as it contained good cholesterol. So now you can conclude that eggs are good for your health up till this new study, until we are told something otherwise. This new finding was reported very widely, and when one source starts sharing it, others share it too, and then people start citing it in conversation. And just like with the media, all context and detail is stripped away and forgotten. But of course, the problem is that just like with the media or even our own memories, there's greater incentive to twist things to fit the narrative you want. So there is every incentive to make the results more interesting and exciting, not accurate. But here's the thing, if we're saying we can trust videos and documentaries, we can trust stats and studies, suddenly you do have to start questioning everything. Quotes, almost all are wrongly attributed to a small group of famous people. Reviews, it's estimated well over half are totally fake to help sell more products. YouTube, the highest ranked videos are the ones who are best at search engine optimization, not the ones that are most accurate. Wikipedia, literally editable by anyone. Money isn't real. If we all stop believing that this paper or those digits on the screen meant anything, and they wouldn't. Our senses? I can tell you this is orange, but we could be seeing two totally different things. Our choices? Based on emotion and cognitive biases, not logic. Our feelings? Manipulated constantly by media and advertisers. Our reality? Well, this is where things start to get very worrying. So here we are, divided, confused, and unsure who or what to believe. It's clear that almost everything has some bias, even if not intentional, which leads to believe that we never actually stop to question. For example, there are many religions worldwide, and yet almost everyone follows the one they were born into. If they had been born somewhere else to different parents, they'd believe something different. The reality is that even things that we think of as being incredibly obvious and unquestionable, like terrorists are evil, it's always more nuanced. To them, we're the evil ones. It's all just down to very different experiences and beliefs that have been instilled in us. We're all just focused on our own half-truths, because even with hard science, we're still just trusting that the scientists have got it right. How many of us have actually read all the papers on an issue and checked for themselves? And I'm not saying we should doubt science, but we do know that science often proves itself wrong and anything can change when new evidence comes to light. So if it's been wrong before, how we know it's not wrong right now? How do we know what we've been told about our world won't get disapproved in the future? We're not far off with virtual reality at the moment. If we can create a world that's indistinguishable from reality, it seems likely we are already in some kind of game or simulation or matrix-type world. And it is really that much harder than believing we're in an infinite large universe spinning on a giant space rock with around millions of other species, all created by a Big Bang or God or whatever you want to believe, is based on the beliefs you were indoctrinated with when you grew up. When you really start to question the world around you, from the news you hear to the reality you experience, it's easy to conclude that everything is a lie. I'd like to end this video with solutions. I'd like to tell you that you can still hold a strong position on something by seeking out the smartest people on the other side of the debate to get their opinion before jumping to conclusions. I'd like to tell you that you can still get a good idea of the truth. You just have to dig a little deeper to get a balanced perspective and not rely on a small pool of media sources. But I can tell you that because by now, you're starting to see that even this very video, the video that's on your side pointing out the lies, is in itself a lie. It's all based from my biased point of view. I view stats that you just took at face value, and even if I tell you that I got them from a reliable source, did the person creating the stats have a bias? If I'm telling you the truth that everything is a lie, then everything isn't a lie, which means I was lying. The more you think about this whole problem of truth and lies, the worse it gets. The more confusing and terrifying everything becomes. Is choice an illusion? Are we being manipulated by a hidden hand that's choosing our politicians and keeping us divided so we can fight each other instead of them? Are our own minds tricking us into making biased judgments on the entire world around us? so much so that we can't be sure of anything outside the existence of our own mind. Eventually, you start to wonder if questioning everything is worth it, or whether blissful ignorance is better. Because if you really are going to question anything that you can prove for certain, then you have to accept that you could be in a Truman-style reality show where the world around you isn't real and everyone else but you is on it. I think I've said too much.